Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Rob from Speaker's Corner here. I am substituting in for Drastic Measures, who is unfortunately ill, so we wish him all the best. And I'm with my long term collaborator from the past. It's a blast from the past. My good friend, Stop Spamming. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Hi everybody, I'm terrible. No, I hate this backwards and forwards, and we're just trying to get everything going, and we're trying to talk about gins and tonics and other stuff.
Indeed. So a little bit last minute here because I think Drastic was thinking of not doing a show, and I happen to be free, which I'm not as much on a Friday now. And Stops is amazing. He's available. So we thought we'd do this. We did sort of a little bit of last minute in the background. So apologies for the delay. But what we want to do, at least for the main video at this moment in time, is something that I think Stops is quite passionate about. He knows a little bit about. So Stops, can you sort of give us a bit of a preamble on that, and then I can bring the video in for everybody to listen to, and we can comment on it.
Okay, I don't know if you guys remember, um, like 5 years ago, there was a video that came out where Mohammed Hijab, went and he made um, a video together with Yasir Qadhi. Now, Muhammad Hijab is an apologist, an Islam apologist he lives in the UK, and he has managed to get quite a following for reasons I don't understand. And Yasir Qadhi is a Muslim scholar, Islam scholar, and he is one of the most, I don't know, authoritative figures in Quran. So I think this is what he got his PhD in Quran studies, or was it Islam studies? I can't even no, was it philosophy? I can't remember. Anyway, so he's a Dr. Yasaqadi, PhD, educated in the US, and he is a renowned scholar. He's like on the level of Shabi Ali, and he was interviewed by Muhammad Hijab 5 years ago, and I think it was in July 2020, and he actually admitted that there are several versions of the Quran, and he says this is a hole in the narrative because nobody can explain it. Now, if you look at the history of Islam and the history of the Quran, you will realize things are off. They don't match. There's something wrong there because everybody's talking about Qira'at and Aruf, which are different versions, different recitations, different whatever. But if you ask a Muslim, okay, can you give me an example of one Qira'at and one Aruf and describe the difference? They can't. They're saying that the Quran goes back to well, either it's God constructed or not, then being transmitted to Muhammad. Muhammad then gave it to his companions and to the scribes. They wrote it down. And then allegedly in 652 or 653, a guy collected all the different versions, collated them, made it into one book, one Quran, destroyed, burnt all the other versions, and kept one. And then this one was sent to 5 different cities and blah, blah, blah. And so this is the Quran, which allegedly comes from the year 652 or 653. This is the so-called Uthman original, which does not exist. So how from this one version you have 7 different versions given to Muhammad, which was brought into one, and then this one authentic version, then again, this was distributed and turned into 10, 20, 30, hundreds of different Qurans, nobody can explain. So the situation that we have today is we have dozens of different Quran versions. And I'm not talking about translations, I'm talking about really Arabic Quran versions, where if you take all the differences, there's a group that has found something like 100,000 or almost 100,000 differences between all these different Quran versions. Between the Varsh and the Hafs version, 5,000 differences alone. The Quran that we commonly know today is the Hafs version, which is the 1924 Cairo version, because that's when it was Well, it took all the different versions together, took the Hafs version, and then said, this is the authentic one. But this was only codified in 1985, I think it was. So the Quran that we have today, in the version today, is actually quite a new Quran. So Yasaqadi in 2020 said, we have so many different versions because he was asked, if you were to write the Quran today, which version, which variant would you use today? And he says, no, don't ask me that. And he could not explain. He said, all versions are the Quran. And he says, we cannot explain this because Western academia has asked questions which we cannot answer, because exactly this question, where is the original Quran? What is the original Quran cannot be answered. And this what came into, this was then used as holes in the Quran, because he said these are holes in the narrative. Okay, that was 5 years ago. Now what happened, he was interviewed again. And again, this was a bombshell, because this time he said that okay, I think everybody knows that we have the primary source, which is the Quran, and then we have the secondary source, which is the Sunnah, which consists of hadith, in other words, the revelations which were transmitted via Muhammad to his different listeners, who then transmitted it to their people, to another one, to another one, to another one, over the centuries until they were written down by, for example, by Bukhari, who was 4,500 kilometers away, and 300 years later, he wrote everything down, and everything is authentic and it's scientifically evaluated and things like that. And then, of course, the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad. So these are the two different sections of Islam. And then you have the tertiary ones, which are the scholars, but that's a different story. Now Yasaqadi has said, well, we don't know the different versions of the Quran, so we have holes in the Quran. And now last month he had another interview and he said the hadith are discredited. Now there's two important messages here.
Before you go into it, do you want to play it, or do you want to explain it first? Or?
No, I would just want to explain it and then show what he actually said. Cool. Because he says two things, and you need to know what he's saying. He's saying, number one, he's repeating what he said 5 years ago, which is why I did this lengthy introduction, because he says, in academia, you have a different approach towards Islam, towards the texts, because there's a red line that you cannot cross when you go and research the Quran, Islam, and all the history of it. And he repeats the same thing here again. He says, in academia, we have a different approach towards the hadith as well. And now comes the bombshell, because he says in academia, the hadiths are discredited. In other words, nobody takes them seriously. And he says, and you will hear this just now from his own mouth, I cannot go and discuss this in academia. He says, if I'm in the madrasa, if I'm preaching, then I will talk about the hadith. Then I can do this. So what he's doing is he's showing the hypocrisy. He's showing how dishonest you have to be an apologist, to be an imam or anything like that who is teaching Islam to others. Because only if you simply believe, if you have faith, you could go and use and quote Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, Dawood, and so on. So this is the distinction he makes. So he says, once again, we have to be hypocrites. On the one hand, we can, on the other hand, we can't. And in reality, as soon as you go deeper into the Islamic texts, you will find that they're no longer valid. And this is what we want to show today, that this is not something that I'm making up. This is not something that we from the Gin and Tonic Show are making up. No, we are quoting Yasir Qadhi, one of the scholars of Islam. And then Shabi Ali has tried to comment on this, but he can't. He just says, yeah, we just have to take it on faith, and that's it. Okay, Rob, then let's go and listen to this, just to show that we're not just making unsubstantiated claims, but this is really what Yasaqadi is saying.
Alrighty, that's a great intro to this. So let me bring the video up, And as soon as I bring it up, it's going to, I think, start playing. So here we go.
Preliminary conclusion is there is no middle ground. And historical critical method and isnad analysis are two diametrically opposed ways of looking at early Islam and reports, and I don't find much commonality between them. If you believe in the, that the Sunnah has been preserved by the hadith, you're going to have to follow a certain epistemology, a certain paradigm. You're well aware, nobody in the academy affirms the Muslim Sunni science of hadith. Nobody. It is considered to be completely discredited. It is considered to be completely discredited. I'm just being factual. I'm describing. As for definitively stating that the hadith go back to the Prophet ﷺ, at this stage of my life, I will have to say this is what I say as a believer, not as an academic. And we're just going to have to understand these are two different epistemologies. So when I become Sheikh Yasir and I go and preach and teach, I will quote Sahih Bukhari and I will quote Sahih Muslim and I will say قال الله قال رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and that's the preacher. And I understand in the academy I cannot quote Bukhari and this will be what the Prophet ﷺ said. I understand this, so I'm just going to have to use a different, epistemology. One will have to navigate the religious side of things if you are a believing Sunni, hadith believer, in a different epistemology. And when you are arguing in the academic world, you'll have to use a different epistemology. And in some areas, they're diametrically opposed.
Wow, that is that is pretty shocking. And I mean, there's so many questions one could ask this fella particularly. Yeah.
Okay, for me, this is another bombshell. This is a real bombshell that he is discrediting any serious conversation, any serious research into the isnad, into the whole structure of hadith, the whole sayings of the Prophet. You can just wipe out. You can just say, well, they don't exist. You can just ignore them because they're useless. Because as soon as you start an honest approach, as soon as you get like an academic approach, and you try and get to the bottom of things, you need to do away with hadith. You are left with the Quran. And with the Quran, you also already destroyed it 5 years ago. Thank you very much. Would love for other people to discuss this. I would love to see what other people have to say about this.
How long ago was this?
This is like a month ago.
Okay, so there's probably been some
maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, so there's been some fallout of this already, presumably. Yeah. I don't know what you've heard about it. Because the first time I've read this, I mean, I'm not keeping up with up-to-date things online so much. So, like, what's been the commentary or thoughts, either from other Muslims or non-Muslims, apart from yourself now? What have you been hearing?
Well, apologists are in shock. They don't know what the hell is going on. They don't know what to do with this. They don't know how they can honestly go and they don't know what to believe. Because as a Muslim, you are stuck. I mean, you have to believe these things. I mean, if you know that you have the 5 pillars and you have the 6, what do you call them, tokens or whatever of belief. And it's amazing that you have to believe that the texts that you get are actually authentic, that you have to have Muhammad explaining the Quran. Otherwise, I mean, how do you know how many times to pray? How do you do the tawaf? How do you?
We must talk about that, yeah, because I encounter these people on Clubhouse. So once we're done with this, we can talk about that because they get the most bizarre ways of doing things. The Quranists or the Quran-centric people. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And this is the problem that you have. Now, all of a sudden, we are stuck only with Quranists because the hadiths of God, like out of the window. You could forget them because I'm a preacher. I would quote Bukhari and Muslim. But this is built on faith. He says, on the other hand, it has to be like, this is the cognitive dissonance that we have there. Because as soon as he starts thinking realistically, They're out. You can forget them, ignore them, because now you are stuck only with the Quran. Congratulations.
I mean, it's bizarre.
This is exactly what I saw.
Is he lying to Muslims in the, when he's doing his, when he's teaching Muslims? Is he lying to them? He knows that it's not. And so he's putting on these two faces, the true face and the false one. I mean, if what he says is true about the Quran, well, he's just undermining himself as, in one hand, he's being honest and saying, hey, this doesn't work. But on the other hand, he's still preaching as if it does. If I were a Muslim and I heard this, I'd be pretty unhappy if I were a follower of his and going, why did you just tell the truth? And maybe he's afraid for his life. Again, if he is studying the truth, be honest about it. Hey, I'm going to lose my academic license. Hey, Muslims will attack me or whatever, so I've got to keep doing it. Then it's understandable, right? That essentially he's got to keep lying, which is what he's doing. But I guess if it's not true, see, this is where it puts them in a bit of a bind, because if it's not true, and heaven is the Muslim heaven is the place to be, then you shouldn't really be concerned. And if you had the family that agreed with you, whoever your family members are, and you died because you were sharing the truth and so forth, then you died honorably, right? And you've gone to a better place. So yeah, I didn't hear it there, at least, and I don't know if you've heard anything. Stops. What's the reasoning for this? Has he said anything about his safety, or is there? How does he sort of justify to himself or anybody else this sort of two conflicting positions? And he's not telling people in the mosques or wherever he's telling people. He's not telling them, I'm just saying this for the sake of it, because I'm this and that reason. He hasn't said that, but it seems like that's what he's doing. So, like, what's your thoughts on this?
It seems quite obvious that he's torn between the two opposites. Like on the one hand, he has to preach based on faith, okay, which is what he says. Then I'll quote Bukhari and Muslim, blah, blah, blah. But then as soon as I'm intellectually honest, I need to stop this faith, and then I need to disregard all of these because they're discredited. They're not taken seriously by academics, especially not the non-Muslim academics. But then what are you left with? I mean, what is the whole point of Islam if you don't have Muhammad? Muhammad is now out the window. You don't need him anymore. How are Muslims going to handle that? How are Muslims going to handle that? No, Muhammad, forget about it. Not important. Maybe he's the one who did the Quran to other people, but that was his only job. And then he's out because he's no longer the warner. He's no longer the prophet. He's no longer the Rasul. He's no longer any of this. You don't need him. He's superfluous.
Well, I guess they're going to say that he's the one that, received the message and then it was codified after him. And he's sort of the person that you follow. But, he doesn't feature, as very much at all in the Quran. So you can't really follow there. What you're following in the Quran is obviously supposed to be Allah's word. But you're not, a lot of his stuff is tied up outside of the Quran as to the sort of person he was and what he said and what you might want to follow and so on. So,
exactly.
At the best, you're going to be reduced to he was a prophet that brought you this book, but that's pretty much it. And a lot of Muslims want to say a lot more about him than that. But the Quranists don't, right? And I was thinking earlier. Yeah. So a lot of the things of how he behaved, what he did, because obviously not everything's covered in the Quran. I mean, that's clear to any sort of thinking person. And so you have all of the supplementary material to assist you either with interpreting the book and or for other things that you might, sort of run into that's not covered in the Quran. So you're taking away a lot of that. But I'm sure the Quranists would be happy to sort of hear this. But it really is bizarre for somebody to be so forthright about their, disingenuousness, certainly in terms of the preaching it to the lay Muslim and still saying that it's true. And this has been published live. I presume you got this live, so this wasn't a secret thing. So
no. This was. So he was in an interview with. They were asking him what his position is, and they were as flabbergasted as was everybody else. And this, of course, now is making the rounds. I'm sure he's going to claim copyright and blah blah blah, like he did the last time, and nobody accepts it. Because last time was also a public interview with Mojab, and they ended up deleting this interview. because they realize this whole mess that they put the apologists in. But it's already, I mean, and of course Christians, I mean, love this. Of course, they're now, they're broadcasting this left, right, and center.
It is bizarre. I mean, this guy's being caught out a second time, isn't it? It's not he's just not being careful enough. I mean, I don't know why he goes on to talk about these things and then puts his foot in it. I mean, it's good in the sense for non-Muslims, as you point out. We can see that either he's speaking the truth about the hadiths, or that he's disingenuous about speaking to other Muslims. He should be saying the same message to everybody. If academia is supposed to be followed, or academia seems to be the guiding light of Islamic thought and so forth, and none of them believe this, and he knows this, and so they talk, not referring to hadiths or whatever, but he's telling the lay person. I don't know if he's afraid of a revolt or threat on his life, or as I say, or whatever. But I'd like to know why he's doing this, which it wasn't clear in the video, the why he's saying two different messages. But I think it's a bombshell for those who think that he's an authority to some degree. It's also be interesting to know whether other academics, because obviously he's going to be associated with other sort of academics out there, because people are going to be asking them questions. Presumably people know who he's associated with. And if he's saying that all of them discredited or don't believe it either, well, now he's just sort of, put that on them as well. They either have to deny or accept that they don't, believe this sort of stuff either. So there's quite a bit of fallout there, not just for him.
I was just going to say the fallout will be interesting. It says we as Muslims, we have to have faith. We need to believe this. And this is, we are submitting ourselves to this. And that is the important thing. So he's just waffling. This is just blah, blah. He's not saying, he's not commenting on what Yasir is doing. And the question is, in fact, really what you are asking. Why the hell did he do this? Was he aware of what he was doing? Was he aware 5 years ago? How much of a predicament he put Muslims into when he said in the Quran? Well, not in the Quran, in the narrative, okay?
Yeah.
And now he puts it in it again, and can anybody protect him?
Well, maybe it's just being honest about it, right? But then the horse has bolted, so to speak, and now you're trying to close the gate afterwards, and that seems to be a problem. I wonder why he's still a Muslim. Maybe he just thinks the Quran is still the word of God, but the other stuff, at least the hadiths, aren't. So it's a bizarre thing, but
that gets me. Because he was, when it was convenient, he was the eminent scholar. Now,
well, maybe it's part of that, right? It's like wanting to stay in the limelight and sort of pulling back the curtain on what academia says, that are keeping close to their chest, if what he says is true, and wanting to sort of reveal that. I'm not sure why, though. Maybe to stay relevant. I mean, the motivation seems a hard one to understand, because you're going to get a tremendous amount of backlash against it, I would imagine, but also from his fellow, academics say, hey, but you're telling everybody that we agree with you. Maybe they do all agree, but now they've either got to come out and say, yes, we agree with him, or they've got to lie. So you've put them in a precarious position. But, this is something from Smile. But, Smile, the other thing is, and I was saying it before the show started, just in the background, while we were trying to get things working. I know a guy on Clubhouse who claims to be Quran-centric. He's got his own interpretation. I brought up, I thought I was live and I was doing a whole session on chapter 3, verse 7, which well, infamous verse in Islam, right? About how the book has got some fundamental clear verses and some are ambiguous, allegorical, da-da-da. But there's people, who don't appeal to the hadiths, who give you their own interpretation. In fact, the non-hadith type people typically are people who say that verse is completely badly, wrongly translated. They don't even accept that verse. They think that every verse is clear, and they think that they can tell you what every verse means. And then I just go ask them about chapter 2, verse 1, Alif Lam Mim. And now you try and see how they struggle to try to tell you what that actually means. And if you look at the hadiths and not hadiths, the tafsirs and other commentaries, people are saying it could mean this, it could be that. Nobody knows what it means. At least nobody academic seems to know what it means or can justify it. But there are a few people on Clubhouse that seem to think that. So for some people, this is not going to be a problem. And they're going to applaud and go, see, we were right all along. But on the other hand, now you're left with doing various things that's, how do you explain this, that, and the other in the Quran? So, and by the way, Stops, can I just ask you this? Because I did have this discussion, and it's important to what we're saying here. Is Sunni Islam the people that, in your experience, because unless you have a polling for it, are they the majority of Muslims on the planet? So when we talk about Sunni Muslims, are there two things to ask you now, and you've got a wealth of experience for people who don't know. Stop's been doing this 15, 20 years, however long you've been involved in this, a lot longer than me. In your vast experience, are what we call Sunni Muslims two things. Do they, almost all of them, accept hadith, and do almost all of them appeal to scholars?
Well, they have to. And the answer is yes. Because what does Sunni stand for? They believe the Sunnah. And the Sunnah is the hadith, is what do you want to call them? The revelations by Muhammad. It's the traditions, it's the experiences, it's the messages, it's the teachings of the Prophet. And this is the Sunnah. And this is why they are called Sunnis. And I mean, you have a couple of thousand different groups within Islam, okay? The main two are Sunni and Shia. Sunnis are approximately 80-85%. Sunnis, well, it varies. And then you have Sufis, and then you have all these other subgroups. And some are just a village which have their own interpretation and their own way of looking at things. And then you have the growing group of the Quranists. And there, funny enough, you have a group of the 19 followers who think that there's a 19 miracle in the Quran, which means that 19 is the baseline of the Quran. So 19 you can find in the Quran, in the universe, and anything, because we're living in a solar system with 19 planets. Everybody knows that. And of course, there are 19 different stars in our galaxy. Everybody knows that everything is based on 19. The same thing as the Quran has 19 chapters. Everybody knows that. The opening line has exactly 19 letters to it. It's bullshit. Because the first thing that you have to ask, well, which Quran are you basing this on? Because we have no proto-Quran. And because we have no proto-Quran, everybody is free to choose their own version of whatever Quran. And then what Rob just said actually goes, some verses are clear. Like the daughters inherit 2/3. Very clear. You can't misinterpret that because it's a number. 2/3 is 2/3. You can't make this into 1/3 or a half. It's 2/3. It stays like that. But then there are sentences which are metaphorical or allegorical or whatever. But which ones are they? Well, you can declare every one that you don't understand to be allegorical or whatever. This is so silly to actually go down this route.
Yeah, it's bizarre. But like I say, I've got somebody that I regularly speak to on Clubhouse that takes this view. He's got a particular interpretation. Every single critique you bring is a wrong interpretation. Like chapter 3, verse 7. I was actually reading it earlier. Maybe I should just read it here again. And this is all relevant to the Yasaqadi thing in the sense that if it's the case that there aren't hadiths, what are Muslims left to do? But I just wanted to be clear, and I appreciate you saying to me that the Sunni Muslims, which I already knew was the majority, 75-80% of Muslims on the planet are Sunnis. But by Sunni, I always understood it to mean that they obviously accepted the Sunnah, that included the hadiths, as you pointed out, and just about all of them are going to appeal to scholars. When you ask them, what does this mean in the Quran? They might give you their opinion, but then they're going to say, but I follow this or that scholar. Now, I was in a hot debate about this with this guy because he thinks that in fact the majority of Muslims who call themselves Muslims are Muslims who read the Quran, who can interpret it themselves, who do not appeal to scholars and appeal to some hadiths, but not all of them. And I'm like, where do you get this from? Exactly.
You're not allowed to. This is oh my goodness. No, there's a strict prohibition for you.
I'd love to get him on
the Quran yourself.
Exactly. You'd love to get this guy. Oh, I tell you what, you would pull your hair out, especially Stops. I've learned to be patient. This guy can waffle a lot. He makes grand claims, which I challenge him on regularly every week pretty much. But he won't provide it. Then when he's asked to give his interpretive method, you've got to go to a private room because, hey, he might cause fitna or whatever the case is. Is that sort of person who, you guys would lose the plot, I think, not because he's rude or whatever, but because he wants to talk a lot, he wants to make claims, and he doesn't defend them. but he's got this interpretive method that according to him is the correct one. I can't remember. There's no Quran out there that I've found online that agrees with what he says. Not a single one. I've only got 50, and I know there's like 50 of them out there, so I haven't looked at all of them. But he hasn't provided. I've said, hey, give me your electronic version so I can see your quote version of the Quran. But I've never had that either. So, but it would be entertainment value with some level of frustration if I could even get him on here, but I doubt he would do that. I did ask him once before to come on the Gin and Tonic, and he was like very nervous. But if you want to confront him directly, he's often got a room going in Clubhouse. So if after this you want to, I'll post a link to it, and you guys can come and join. You'll suddenly see all these new joiners on his Clubhouse room, but be prepared for him to ramble incessantly, make claims that I've heard like 50 times. It would be somewhat entertaining, but somewhat frustrating as well, I think.
Yeah, but I would love to hear his comments on this. And in general, I would love to get Muslims now to actually voice their opinion on what is happening. I mean, this is still very new, okay? So there's not a lot out there yet. It's slowly starting to pick up, where people are voicing their opinions. And most of what I've seen is just simply saying, well, now we need to abandon Yasir Qadhi because he's telling us the truth.
Yes. Or you've got to counter it with evidence, right? But that's going to be hard. If he and the academics know what's going on, what evidence are you going to be able to bring, right? Because the academics is typically where people, point to or look at as, the authority figures. And if they themselves are denying this, if this is true, that not just he doesn't believe it, but academia, of which he seems to be aware, whoever he's mixing with, well, that's going to be problematic. Now, who's going to step up and do it? Like this, what's the guy's name that they put here? That short little hobbity guy that fancies himself, Farouk. No, what's his name? Stops. You know who I'm speaking about. That guy that used to do videos responding to the rationalizer and stuff, or maybe to you, whoever it was, made a name. He was a nobody. Farouk somebody, man. Let me just look up in the text here. Who was this guy? Somebody mentioned him here.
You're not talking about Fareed.
Fareed. I think that's the one. Fareed, yes. That's the guy.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, that's what you're going to be left with, people like that. Because if the scholars, in fact, don't believe this, you're not going to be able to get any of them to come on and defend it in a scholarly way. But maybe they'll do the same as Yasaqadi. Just tell everybody, yes, it is, whatever the case is.
Yeah, but these are the people who, like, I would imagine that Fareed is going to be the loudest one to say, we need to drop Yasir Qadhi.
Fareed responds, there we go.
Yeah.
Yes. Or he'd have to you sort of contradict Yasaqadi, but now you get down to the evidence, right? And if you actually are going to present it, and Yasaqadi knows it's not true, well, now either he has to retract his comments, or he has to show Farouk that it's false, and that itself would be, just be worth watching for kind of an internal implosion of Sunni Islam, at least in the traditional sense that I understand it.
And all you need to do is just ask them, okay, show me the hadith, show me the originals that we have. Doesn't matter whether it's Bukhari, whether it's Jamidi, whether it's Dawood, it doesn't really matter. Show me the books that we have which say anything about this. Show me where is this isnad? Where are the people mentioned in the isnad? Show me any kind of documentation about these people. Sorry, the isnad is the chain of narrators. In other words, like Muhammad will say something to his hairdresser, and the hairdresser will then, when he gets old, tell his son or nephew or something what Muhammad said. And then this guy will tell somebody else, and he will tell the cleaning lady, and he will tell blah, 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 until a couple of 100 years later, somebody will say, I heard what Muhammad said 1,000 years ago, and this is what he said. It's crazy. Now, at the moment, we are still saying, okay, there's like 200, 250, 300 years between what Muhammad said and when it was written down. The problem is we don't have that. If you look at Bukhari, he was like 4,500 kilometers away, and he lived a couple of 100 years later. But what has been attributed to him, we don't have. So the earliest extant manuscripts, in other words, the manuscripts that we have available today, which are said to come from Bukhari, are from like 400 years ago. So we're not talking 1,400 years ago, but 400 years ago. So there's like a huge discrepancy here. And the earliest manuscripts that we can get are always from the 9th and 10th century. This goes for the Quran, this goes for the hadith, this goes for everything. So it's pretty obvious that Islam was sort of started sometime around the 7th century, then came into being in the 8th century, and then was finally written down in the 9th century. And then in the 11th century, this is when all the manuscripts started being putting, all the fine tuning for the text was done. So this is the timeline that I can see at the moment. And this is simply not what Muslims are being taught. The standard narrative in Islam is still that this was Muhammad in the early 7th century, and then the Quran and everything was compiled middle of the 7th century, and then Islam was alive and kicking end of the 7th century. And this is not true. It's not the case.
Yeah, and so now it's sort of slowly coming out by somebody either brave or foolish, depending on your point of view, sort of pointing this out, that is in academia. And so I think, it's probably going to be, if he's not prepared to retract it, I suppose the Muslim, apart from maybe threatening him, but the Islamic sort of response is probably going to be to discredit him as a person, so that people, stop taking him seriously. I think that's probably all the only sort of strategy they probably have, because if they can't prove it intellectually or academically, well, then what have you got left, right? So
because if you're honest, it kills Islam completely. Absolutely.
Well, unless you become a Quranist, but then there's and that seems very problematic, just to go that route, and then to use your own sort of interpretive skills or lack thereof to interpret the entire Quran. And I think if you've never came across it, because I don't remember coming across it much, if at all, in Speaker's Corner, but I did come across it online, and particularly here on the one or two of the Clubhouse scene. So I've been exposed to more of these sort of people, and more recently, and it's bizarre, their sort of interpretive. And when I ask them, and here's the killer thing, when I ask them, why would I accept that? So one, because they don't provide it all. Some of them will tell you what they believe, but then they don't actually provide like the reasoning why we should accept that. So what I've done, because one thing as an example, so here's an example of what some of them do. So they say, for example, in chapter 3, verse 7, where it says some, verses are foundational, clear, whatever the case is, and some are allegorical, unclear, unspecific, depending on your translation. They then say, well, no, but the word for unspecific doesn't mean what that verse says. And their reasoning for this is because, hey, now I haven't checked this, but let's assume that they were correct for the moment. Maybe Stops can immediately tell us that it's not true. But what they say is, but that word, I don't know what word it is, maybe mutashabiha, I can't remember off the top of my head. But whatever the word is, they say, no, but everywhere else in the Quran, it means similar. So therefore, what we should do is take it to have that same meaning here in chapter 3, verse 7. And then I just say to them, well, why would I use that into what makes it the case that I should accept that part of your interpretive model? That because a word is used, 49 times out of 50 and it means X, therefore it must mean that here. If a word can have more than one meaning and the context helps you decipher what it means, why should I say that it means that? Because if you go look at chapter 3, verse 7, and you just insert the word similar instead of unspecific, the chapter doesn't make any sense. So that verse, rather. So now you have to go and redo that whole verse to try and make sense of it, so that you can say, A, that all the verses are clear. B, that none of them are only Allah knows. And C, that how do you make sense of this? Seeking discord. You're not going to seek discord if you're looking at verses that are all, to be known. So it makes sense the way the verse is written there at the moment. So it's bizarre. But this whole thing of like, why would I use that interpretive model? Or why would I accept that part of it? They've never thought to ask themselves this question. Or when I ask it, they don't have anything to say. They sort of ramble. You can tell that they're not responding to you. And so now you've got these guys making up their own interpretive models. And maybe it's consistent, I don't know, but it seems entirely made up by them, and it requires a lot of changing of the straightforward English translations that are like the majority translations.
Well, I have two suggestions here. One is you can always go and check what the old tafsir say, because these are the earliest interpreters. Okay, this is from 11th, 12th, 13th century, so you can't get older than that. And how they understood the sentences, how they understood the words, I think is the closest to what the intended meaning is. The second thing what you can do is you take a word, because what Rashid Azza did, he started this database on Quranex. And the beauty of Quranex is you have the corpus. In other words, you can go to the roots of the words, and then you can click on the word, and the word will go and link you to Lane's lexicon and to, I can't remember what the other one is. So you can actually go and take this word and look it up and see what kind of associated interpretations are possible for this one word. And then you can ask the question that Rob is just asking, why should I take that one? And that's where you go back to the tafsir and say, how did they understand it? And why did the so-called scholars who studied ancient Arabic, why would they take a specific meaning of this? And why do you go now and change that? So this is, I think it's pretty easy to do this yourself.
Yeah, look, if I could get this guy on, it would be entertainment, I guess, for people, because he's got his sort of standard script about it's all in the language type of thing, and other Quranists have got their own way. But as putting aside, the reason we're going through this, folks, is because this might be an entailment of not accepting hadiths as sort of bringing up your own interpretation, because the hadiths and sunnah do help you interpret the Quran, or at least that's been the so-called wisdom for a great many years. So if you take that away, well, what have you got left, and how do you come about doing this? Because this other guy claims that he's got an interpretive method, but no, I can't find it anywhere. He hasn't shared it. And so at this stage, and he doesn't accept what he calls the kahunas. So in other words, the scholars, who are they, right? They're just these weird people. So, yeah.
Well, also, you need to understand, because we didn't even mention this, there's another level in between, which are the so-called madhabs. And the madhabs then go and give you another level of interpretation of what it's supposed to say in the Quran. Not to everything, but at least the four big ones, they have their own interpretations, and they are considered to be scholars. And their interpretations and their opinions are widely regarded as authoritative. So how you can, I don't know how you could go against this whole mountain of authority that has been established over the last 1,000 years.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, this is a shake-up, and I think this is going to be quite an amusing story to watch over the next couple of months. What exactly the fallout, what that is going to be.
Yep, indeed. Well, I think that's been an interesting revelation. I certainly wasn't aware of that. I hope that's been informative to other people. I'm going to keep an eye out to see if I hear anything about it. I might chat to these people on Clubhouse, hear what they've got to say, and we'll take it from there. So I really appreciate that, Stops, and it's useful to know. Hopefully it's been valuable. Any final words on your side?
Well, I maintain this is going to be quite another, like, similar shake-up to what we had 5 years ago. And it's really not looking too great for apologists, for Islam apologists, because they're really, I don't know, it's like they're being handed out wet ammunition. So that's the way that it works at the moment.
Yes, we'll see how that goes. And I'm sure over the coming weeks, Stops will keep his ear to the ground, so to speak, see what comes of it. And perhaps I'll be again around. I appreciate being here again with you, Stops. Let's again.
Yeah, thanks for popping in, and thanks for helping out, because it's really terrible if somebody gets ill and can't. I mean, he sounds really terrible, poor Drastic.
Yes, yeah, he does. I've got a cat that's attacking me here. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for joining us here on this slightly shorter show, but certainly impactful, I hope. Until next week again, when I'm sure you'll be back with your amazing regular hosts, Drastic and Stop Spamming. Until then, take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, guys. See you next week. Bye-bye.